Last of Us was great. I'm just get right to it. I've never played the video game, so I'm not gonna be one of those guys that's gonna be looking at the video game and trying to comp it back or be like, "Oh, the video games," but whatever it is, this is great so far, and I know we're gonna get into it, but I'm just on, like, a high from it. I'm really just happy that something that has anticipation like this, like high anticipation, so far so good, especially from episode 1.
This is a show that for a lot of people, it's been anticipated for a long time. There's been projects that have been in development hell, I guess, for the past few years. I know Sam Raimi was supposed to do a movie on The Last of Us. This is a video game that people have been longing to be adapted for quite some time. And based on what I've heard from people who've played the game, from online blogs and articles, this is something that is very much adaptable. And it's kind of surprising to me with a story that it has, a zombie apocalypse story, which seems a little bit outdated now in 2023, all of a sudden becomes more relevant with its pandemic themes. Um, it's got a very exciting cast, Bella Ramsey. We talk about Game of Thrones, and then we get Pedro Pascal, the Mandalorian himself. And when you have that HBO sticker and logo, and you have that stereo cranking right before the theme comes on, like it just generates automatic excitement. Uh, and what do you have any before we get into the Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb? Did you have any familiarity with this story at all? Had you ever played it at a friend's house? I know we're both not really big video game guys.
No, I had no idea before, like, reading into it. I had no idea what the video game was, and I was just trying to think, like, what because I was the story, obviously, synopsis is, like, this one guy is taking this girl, like, somewhere, and I was just thinking, like, "How is this a video game? How is this storyline a video game?" Because you think of, like, Call of Duty, you have, like, your missions that you go on, but you have this end goal, and I'm just trying to think, how is The Last of Us, like, a normal civilian a sick video game. You know, like Uncharted, you could kind of see like, oh, that could be a sick video game. Like you're trying to find treasure or whatever, and you're going on these crazy missions. Last of Us is just like I don't know what it could be. I know Fallout is a big video game that's like I understand because those have like missions inside and a bunch of other things. But The Last of Us, I was kind of like, huh, this was a big video game. Like I was kind of perplexed by it, but it seems like so far, like again, knowing nothing about the video game, this show is sick.
Yeah, it is sick. And I think when I was listening and reading a little bit about this show, a lot of it has to do with like survival skills during a zombie apocalypse. And that's been, right, pretty much the popular, whether you see it in shows or movies, that's like the popular trope of like zombie like projects. It's what would you do if you were in this situation? It's a lot of gathering of resources. And we started to see a little bit of that in this first episode. But when people talk about The Last of Us, they say the narrative of the story really is adaptable. And if you have the right casting and the right pieces around, right, to support what this story can do, it can be something special. And I think we saw glimpses of that. I think we should jump into the synopsis and everything right now. For those who are unaware of this show, first off, make sure you watch the first episode before you listen to this. If you haven't seen it yet, go watch it, then listen, or you can skip right to our rankings of 2022 shows. We anticipate The Last of Us, but just might be on our pod next year when we rank the best 2023 shows. But the synopsis reads: Joel and Ellie, a pair connected through the harshness of the world they live in, are forced to endure brutal circumstances and ruthless killers on a trek across a post-outbreak America. Rotten Tomatoes critically has this show at a 99%. It has gone up from the initial 97% it had when the review embargo was lifted. Audiences have it at 96%. IMDb, the first episode is a 9.6 out of 10. That's absolutely astonishing. I guess, Ricky Flicks, like when it comes to TV shows on the zombie apocalypse, you immediately think Walking Dead. Okay. And I think that goes with the trope I was talking about earlier, where it's like, what would you do in a zombie apocalypse? What weapon would you choose? What people would you align with? Who would you stay away from? How did the show kind of tell you this is going to do something different with the zombie genre as opposed to like a Walking Dead?
Again, Walking Dead for me, I think I've said this on the show before. I've only seen like the second, like the later parts, like later seasons. I didn't actually watch like the
That's
first couple.
crazy, dude. That's it's most people that watch like the first 5 seasons, but you're like, no, I watched like the late seasons
Yeah,
and
and
not the first couple.
right, and I always told myself I'd go back. I love John Bernthal, and I know what happens with his character, but like I would love to see like him and in Walking the Walking Dead. But like I think just like looking at this, especially now, like with COVID-19 and the pandemic here and lockdowns that happened in 2020 and such, quarantine still going on today. It's like very interesting looking at this show from that angle as well. Because if this came out pre COVID-19, I think because throughout this entire thing, I was just thinking about COVID and just like lockdowns, quarantines. But like if it ever got supremely out of hand like this show, I think this one, the difference that I like is that when you're looking at a zombie movie or show, you have the slow people walking, the pale faces. This one's completely different. They kind of introduce you like in 1968 to like, oh, like what if like they're not zombies or anything like that, but like just an infection that kind of makes it like zombies, but kind of crazier. And it was a different look, obviously. You don't really know because they could be completely normal, but infected. I just think that the look of everything just brought a different sense of like different feel to it, and that I really liked.
Yeah. Again, they weren't as like obviously zombies as The Walking Dead, but I think what this show does, which is like, I kind of get why people were like, yeah, let's make this into a show or a movie. It's not just a classic human versus zombie story. It has different elements to it where it's human versus zombie, but then it also has the totalitarian style of government that comes into play that isn't dived into whatsoever with The Walking Dead. There still is a government during a zombie apocalypse. And it's one that is harsh, it's brutal. They do public executions that people are going into quarantine zones that aren't sanctioned or authorized. You have like groups like the Firefly, there's like rebellious type of groups that are anti-government versus the Federa, which I think is like the totalitarian state that they're currently in. That is the government. Uh, I just thought I was a little confused at the beginning though. Like if I had like for someone who didn't play the game, and this is like, I guess, something that could also be viewed as a positive for the show. I felt a little confused in the middle when we do that time jump after 20 years. Like when it talks about the Federa, Firefly, what are they talking about? The different colors, the scanning of people, and what's going on between Pedro Pascal and his relationships to these others. It felt like if you had a familiarity with this show, like you are like, oh, there we go. I remember playing this sequence. I remember like walking through and meeting these people for the first time. For me, felt like I was out of the loop for a sec, but by the end of the episode, I felt like I was ingratiated into the setting. As someone who hasn't played the game before, were there moments where you were feeling confused or kind of like out of the know compared to like someone who has experience playing the game?
I'm in a different boat as you, Doctor. I think the opposite. I like it when shows don't take the audience as dumb. And
Well,
I think this
yeah,
show, like, instead of like telling us exactly everything like that, like they did it subtly through signs saying like, oh, if these are the symptoms of the infection, but like they didn't like have someone try to explain to us. And I think the thing that I think this show did best compared to compared to most of the shows in 2022 that we're going to probably talk about today is that television shows we always talk about like, oh, your first episode, you're like setting up. It's a lot of like you're setting up your base, your knowledge base, like what the show's going to be about, and also like getting people to know all the little things that you have to know going forward. I think this show did a great job of measuring that and not only saying it through like subtle messages like that, but also still making it incredibly entertaining. I think there are a lot of action sequences that were great. The intensity that was brought, that actually was brought by the actors was fantastic, and the show was compelling. And you were intrigued throughout to learn these things. And I think because they didn't tell us right away, well, this is what Firefly is, or this is what Fedra is, but we kind of are figuring out through our heads throughout the episode, putting pieces together. I think that brought an intrigue and a compellingness factor that made me even more invested into the show.
yeah, that's where I'm saying like it was like for someone who doesn't have a familiarity with this world, doesn't know these characters, doesn't know about this infection, it does make you curious and want to stick around. But I think by the end of the episode, you can make some predictions about what this plot is really about, and especially like what is the purpose of Bella Ramsey's character as Ellie, and who is. And it leaves questions at the end like who is her mother, and she like are they a member of the government? Are they a scientist? Do they have possession of a cure? Did they do this initial trial of a cure on Ellie herself? There's so many questions that come with it. And you mentioned like they do a lot with the writing here to basically make like the audience is taken as intelligent. And I think specifically they do a great job of that with Pedro Pascal's character. And I want to jump to him because what I liked here is that it just doesn't jump to the zombie apocalypse. I like it when you have a little intro to the start. Like you think like A Quiet Place, where it's like the intro, right, to like this like catastrophic situation and how people react. And we also, even before that, you have the relationship built between the daughter of Pedro Pascal, his Joel, and how he is kind of in a rough place right now. He doesn't like, he seems like he has a job where he's working late hours, a lot of manual labor. He lives with his brother. We learn on the back of his truck, he has a bumper sticker. And so it says he's a veteran. It makes you think, okay, this guy, even before this apocalypse, probably has a little bit of a dark past. He's a little bit of a traumatic. He may have gone through some trauma, right, from his military service. And I thought like, and I think just the daughter is the one that's taking care of the father, Joel, here. And it shows like their relationship, specifically like how tight it is. I know we're going to, I guess, learn a little bit more between Joel's character with his brother, Tommy, right, who also seems to be taken captive by the Fedra during this time. And as I said before, this is like setting up also it's not just human versus zombie, but it's like Joel, who used to serve the government, right? Serve this country. His daughter is taken, right? It's literally killed by the military and government he served. And now the government's holding his brother. I think it's setting up some really interesting dynamics I didn't anticipate in the show. I just like, okay, it's a zombie apocalypse. He has to transport this person. It's just the different narratives and how they built in the early like background on Joel, I think is going to be integral for the future. And I think Pedro Pascal kind of murdered it. So what did you think about the writing of Joel here and the performance from Pascal?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think they subtly were telling us who he was, not just by his actions and how he's handling with him and his daughter in the beginning, the first 20 minutes, but also through like the veteran sign, how he's able to stay calm, cool, and collective throughout that initial first day of this apocalypse pandemic.
Yeah, survival skills.
Yeah, he has the survival skills. They're driving past the highway, and he's like, "Don't pull over." Like he knows what to do immediately.
With a baby too. With a baby.
And he just knows right away, like, nope, we're not doing this. And I think that's where it goes back to the beginning now, where I'm now connecting the dots of what you're saying in the beginning, where like in the video game, you're seeing the survival skills. Yeah, you could probably like envision a video game that was similar to that, based on those skills and then those separate side missions that you could do. But I think here, like the writing, the creator, Craig Hazan. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that
showrunner, or is it the
creator, writer? He also did Chernobyl.
Yep.
And I think you could really kind of see the parallels between the two so far. And I know Chernobyl is based off a true story. This is based off a video game, completely different things here. But I think that now, I have that trust with this showrunner here that going forward with a powerful actor like a Pedro Pascal, similar to Chernobyl that we saw in that series, I think we're going to see something special here. I really have faith. And now this first episode really kind of confirmed those beliefs and that high anticipation.
And I want to say like a couple other like notes that I made is on the Pascal character, because this first episode, this pilot really did kind of feel like a deep dive on him specifically. And even after the time jump, like, but I guess I do want to address like he passes the child and the family who need help. And this is somewhere he cares about those who he's connected with, who he's close with. But now, right, once we make that time jump, he's going to have to become, it kind of gives me a sense he's going to become tighter with Ellie, someone he's unfamiliar with. And he didn't help those people in the past, but he might have to rely on people he's unfamiliar with to get back to those he was close with, like his brother, Tommy, who appears, once again, they don't say explicitly what happens to Tommy, but you can kind of make the assumption by the end of the episode that Tommy has joined this rebellious group, Firefly, and is being held captive by the government. That's just like a safe assumption, I would say, by me, and I guess by audiences. But when he is that time jump 20 years later, he's doing these odd jobs, trying to earn as much money as possible. He's hustling left and right, trying to earn as much funds as possible so he can travel outside of this quarantine zone and rescue his brother. There's a moment where they're taking these bodies that have been infected or killed, and they're burning them into like a dumpster of sorts in the middle of the city in Boston, apocalyptic Boston. And there's a moment where he's carrying a child. It's clearly a child, and he dumps the child into the fire. And it just, to me, it just shows like he's lost, right, a sense of humanity. He's gone through so much trauma in his life, even prior to losing his daughter. He has become like almost emotionless, and his one mission is to save his brother. And it's sad to see how it's like he lost his daughter, like his passion towards kids. He's burning this child, right, who's died, and now he has to take care of this other child. I thought the writing, it's just going to show you the journey that Joel goes through. Pedro Pascal brought intensity to this role. And when we talk about like The Walking Dead, like what's the differences here? The Walking Dead, based on a comic book, there are moments where there's very much over the top characters, and there's a lot of corniness at points in that show. Here, it seems like it's like a deep dive, and it seems like it's taking itself supremely seriously, what you expect out of an HBO show. So I'm just impressed in that regard with like, this is something you could obviously zombie stuff. You could see people like doing that over the top, doing that corniness, and like the zombies themselves, how serious they look, how human they look. It just, them taking the source material seriously has got to make even people that are just interested in prestige HBO Sunday night TV, it hooks them in immediately. A great pilot.
It hooks me in. And I think as well, like in the first 20 minutes, like he was like not the greatest father. Like he was a great father, as in like he made sure like, oh, she's like, my daughter's gonna get fed, go to school, shelter, things like that, the basics. And like I'm gonna spend time with her. But he would forget his own birthday and his birthday cake and making breakfast and running late and things like that. And that's like the only thing that I thought was like my only big, like not big, but like issue with the show is that if he's such like a clever, smart person, survival expert, but he's always forgetting like, oh, I forgot the birthday cake. I'm so focused on this. Like I just didn't believe that, to be honest. But it makes sense going forward is that he's gonna have to like fix his past wrongs or like learn from that first experience with his daughter to now Bella Ramsey's character, kind of being a father figure for her going forward and being probably a better like an improving father, I think, in such a pandemic apocalypse type scenario.
Yeah, and like he was already having flashbacks by the beginning of the end of the first episode, where it's like he remembers the situation where the military, the government confronts him and a child, and he lost his daughter as a result. He's instinctual now, where he's like, "Oh my gosh, learning from my mistakes, I'm going to take out this guy before he has the opportunity to take us down." That was like the beginning of the totalitarian government. It's carried over these last 20 years, and he's got to protect this kid. And then after that moment, this is like the small stuff, the small writing we're talking about. What does she do? She mentions his watch. She's like, his watch isn't working. I'm just like, oh man, this is like really clever and like really building, right, the foundation of the relationship between Ellie and Joel. But speaking of Ellie, we got Bella Ramsey here, really spunky, and someone I don't think rubbed me the right way at the beginning of this show. I know people, I had a feeling like she would be like this, and there's a lot of mystery around her character. You have the Firefly, this rebellious group talking to Ellie, saying like, this is like why we have to transport you to this location, and they don't tell the audience. Once again, good writing. What was your introduction to Bella like? Did you like her as a character? She's dropping a lot of F-bombs. Like maybe she's been through quite a bit herself, and maybe she's more a mature kid than I was anticipating going in. But thoughts on Bella Ramsey?
Yeah, I right what you said at the end there. Like we learned that she went to military school. She's definitely like a fighter, and I think everybody is in this type of scenario, but her especially. I think that's good knowledge to know going forward. Yeah, the spunkiness attitude in the beginning kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but you knew that going in, like from her character in Game of Thrones. And to here, it's like you kind of could have predicted that. And I think we got a little bit even more so than that. But that's going to make for a good dynamic for Pedro Pascal's character that's quiet, intense versus a spunky, energetic, a lot more energetic Bella Ramsey going forward to kind of balance each other out.
Yeah, and like it's interesting when you bring up Game of Thrones. when it's the character she had, it's like a queen of a land at such a young age, and she shows such a level of maturity. But she shows the level of maturity here, but she's kind of an a-hole. She wasn't like late as her as Lady Mormont. Like she wasn't an a-hole. She was just someone that you could feel like you could put your trust in and rely on. Here, it's like someone you feel like is mature. It's like way, way mature beyond her years, but in a way where she doesn't trust anybody, you know? And I'm excited to see where that relationship goes. I think flaws for the show, we brought up a couple. I kind of wanted to hammer down a couple clearer ones. I kind of mentioned it before as someone who, and you thought this is a strength, and I think this is something you could read as a positive and a negative. It's what they kind of anticipated. I think it was a way they were satisfying people who were familiar with the game, where it's like, hey, we're introducing these elements, these parts, these names, these rebellious groups, these actions by the government. And it leaves me, like a newer audience, a little bit confused, but comfortable by the end of the episode. Like that's one of my flaws. I think you've already kind of like talked about the writing, how it's like, hey, that's a good thing. Any other flaws you got from this show from the first episode?
I see what you're saying, and I definitely like I think that was a strength, but at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day, like I think the one thing I would agree with you to go with your point was that the light at the end, the that red light, I thought that was the only time that they didn't really introduce it well, like as it wasn't obvious enough, it was too subtle.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was such a big part in the episode at the end and going forward and like basically the reason for the show. And I thought maybe that could have been more obvious just because of how crucial that is. But then the only other flaw I would say would be the Pedro Pascal, like the forgettingness in the first 20 minutes, like when we're introduced to his character. Just
Okay.
I think that when we're gonna learn more about him, everyone like he has this perceived like, even around Boston, like the camps in Boston, like the civilians, they're like, oh, we're not messing with that guy and things like that. We need to learn more about his character pre-pandemic and also what he did in those 20 years as well. But I want to know what he did even before he had a daughter because it just seems to me that he's a really smart individual and also like obviously a great soldier or survivor if you want to say. But I just don't believe that he would have been that I guess forgetting or just that like not on top of things as a father, a single father.
But it makes you wonder, like, because like that goes into like the beginning of the show, and it seems like he's much more attentive to detail after this 20-year period, right? He goes from 36 to 56 by the end of this, and maybe it looked like he didn't really take care of himself, right, at the beginning of the first 20 minutes of this episode, but by the end, it seems like he's very much aware of everything happening in this quarantine zone. And it seems like he knows the ins and outs, and it feels like he is a force to be reckoned with. And you, as you said before, like they say in the back half of this episode, he's someone that people are intimidated of, you know. And he's hardened right now, but how is he going to be softened later on? I actually liked the ending a lot here too with the song, and like the '80s song. I think it was Depeche Mode, but it's like, hey, dangers afoot. They're walking into the contaminated
Right.
zone right here. They're not supposed to go by. And I do like how Bella Ramsey, she points out like she's smart herself, and I think there's going to be a great tag team where they can like be figuring out each other's puzzles, right? And they're going to have a chemistry that is she's showed the maturity, but she also is extremely intelligent. And for her to break those codes and to know how people communicate in this day and age, it kind of shows what she's been through, not only the military academy, the experiences she's had, and it's a dynamic I can't wait to see more of. Any other final thoughts before we move on to our best shows of 2022?
I think for a pilot episode, this is one of the best pilot episodes I've seen in recent memory.
Whoa,
And
whoa.
I'm not saying again, like just when I say that, I'm not trying to say this is going to be one of the best shows I've seen in recent memory, but just pilots. And the reason I say that is because I mentioned this earlier. We always talk about these shows like they're 8 episodes, 10 episodes, 10 hours of your time, so a lot longer than a movie.
Mhm.
So they build up these beginning episodes to get your knowledge down, to make sure that you're ready to go and understand everything going forward. But a lot of times it's slow, especially the pilot or the first couple episodes. And I know we're going to be talking about some shows that I'll probably bring up as flaws for being a little too slow. But this one, you just had those like powerful sequences and exciting, entertaining events in this episode that made you like that you would expect down the road in like a third episode, fourth episode, a penultimate, and you had it in the first episode. And now it's like, yeah, now your anticipation levels, they were already high. Now they're even higher after that for that first episode. But but I trust this writer and showrunner, and going forward with these powerful performances so far, like my hands are, I think, are comfortable with these people.
Yeah, and just the fact they're taking their time, right? Like they wanted you to get to know Joel, and Pedro Pascal's performance like helps out with the enjoyment of this episode. So an actor we're familiar with, and like seeing his face, like we know him from The Mandalorian, right? But like here, it's like we love it when he takes off his mask in The Mandalorian. We like his performance in The Mandalorian, but here it seems like he's really going to get to shine. And I think after this first episode has such a focus on him, I anticipate the second episode is going to have a heavy emphasis on Bella Ramsey as Ellie, and then we just go from there.